I'm Judy Vishniak. I'm the Associate Dean of the Fellowship Program at the Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Study, and we are very glad that you've joined us today. It promises to be a wonderful event. But first, to Professor Monson, who is the Quincy Jones Professor of African American Music here at Harvard University. She is one of the most exciting ethnomusicologists specializing in jazz, African American music, and the music of the African diaspora. She came to this interest in jazz because she was a trumpet player. And when she was a teenager, she realized that jazz used the trumpet in a much more exciting way than classical music. Actually, she pursued her musical training after she got a BA from the University of Wisconsin at the New England Conservatory of Music, but then decided to go the academic route and received an MA and a PhD in musicology/ethnomusicology at NYU. Professor Monson is the author of 2 books, Saying Something, Jazz Improvisation and Interaction, and the second is called Freedom Sounds, Civil Rights Call Out to Jazz and Africa. And she also edited a collection, The African Diaspora, A Musical Perspective. In her first book, Saying Something, Jazz Improvisation and Interaction, Professor Monson focuses on the rhythm section, piano, bass, and drums, of small group jazz improvisation. These musicians are just as important as the soloist in the success of an ensemble, although the soloist often gets most of the attention. This ethnographic study on improvisation focuses on the musicians themselves. The book allows also for, quote, and I'm quoting from Professor Monson, for a rethinking of the interaction between musical analysis and cultural interpretation from an interactive point of view, with particular attention to race and culture. In the book, she tries to capture the magic created by improvisation among musicians as it is experienced in real time, and she argues that jazz is an art form, can only be understood within the contents of Eurocentrism and white supremacy. One critic wrote, I quote, "Saying Something is a mind opener, a stimulating and determined mapping out of new intellectual territory." This book won the Sonic Society's Loewens Prize for the best book published in American music in 1998. In her second book, Freedom Sounds, Civil Rights Call Out to Jazz and Africa, Professor Monson explores the role of jazz musicians during the civil rights struggle in the US from 1950 until 1975. She argues that jazz music and the discourses around this form of music cannot be separated from the racial politics of the time. She traces the changing musical, political, and social environment in which musicians performed as they interacted with members of the music industry and political activism. Black and white musicians contributed to the debate about race in American society when they performed at certain locales and engaged about the subject of race explicitly in their music. Professor Monson argues that music was the, quote, sphere in which radical redefinitions of the self could take place, redefinitions that helped many musicians and their devoted audiences to break out of the socially imposed niche that US society had defined for Black America. This was an era in which music helped affect political change, and, quoting her again, the sense that a great deal was at stake led to an intense musical practice that to this day forms the core of what it is to be a jazz musician, end of quote. Professor Monson will speak about this year's project on Neba Solo in a minute. She has taught at the University of Chicago, Washington University before coming to Harvard. Professor Monson received fellowships from the ACLS, the Stanford Humanities Center, and the Guggenheim Fellowships. Let us welcome Professor Monson.
Well, thank you so much, Judy, for such a generous introduction. I'm overwhelmed. I'd like to begin today by welcoming my research partners and friends, Neba Solo and Chaka Traore. Au danse, au bisimila, Radcliffe La. Welcome to Radcliffe. I'd like to thank the Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Studies profusely for making it possible for them to be here. Dean Liz Cohen, Becky Wasserman, Director of Academic Ventures, and Phyllis Strimling, Director of Academic Events, and her staff have been truly amazing. Yet a special thanks must go out to Caroline Elkins for her 11th hour help last week in making sure Neba Solo and his brother were granted their visas to leave Bamako. After my lecture, Neba Solo will be presenting an hour-long concert of his music dedicated to peace in Mali, which will be much better than anything I have to say here today. Of course, that won't stop me. So I'd like to start out by showing you a map of Mali. And this is a map before the coup d'etat, and it shows you Neba Solo's hometown in Kenedougou and the city of Sikasso, the second largest city in Mali. Here it is after this spring, which shows that the northern two-thirds of the country has been captured by a coalition of Islamist organizations and Tuareg rebels advocating independence. The longing for peace in Mali could not be more poignant than now, because a military campaign to retake the north is in the process of being planned as we speak. There is also a forthcoming national dialogue to hopefully avoid having to implement this plan that is supposed to take place 2 weeks from now. My job today is to help you understand where Neba Solo's music comes from, most notably how a quintessentially rural musical tradition was modernized and professionalized by Neba Solo and his group to become a vibrant part of Malian popular music. I'd also like to give a window into the complex cultural and musical aesthetics of his music. I'll begin by reading from one of my chapters in the new book, which sets the landscape of the journey between the city of Sikasso and the village of Kenedougou. In other words, the Senufo agricultural milieu in which Neba Solo's music was nurtured. I'll finish the first section with a condensed video performance of one of his compositions, Ching Poroko no Monguru, the Ode to the Champion Cultivator. The second part will take you through the lyrics of several of his other songs, which serves to illustrate the ethical and social preoccupations of his musical messages, which, like everything in Mali, refers to cultural themes and values from the Islamic and Mande worlds, as well as his own Senufo cultural milieu. Social critique, health education, environmental awareness, and advocacy for women are all part of these messages. The songs I have chosen to present today are about history, corruption, gender relations, and the need to follow your passion. These excerpts will hopefully familiarize your ears with the sound of his contrapuntally rich and exciting music and prepare the stage for the more truly musically nerdy section of the talk, which will be part 3. In that, I will attempt to show you some of the architecture of his musical language, which I sometimes like to call Neba Solo's Senufo counterpoint. Although music and words illustrate the social relations most visibly, it is actually in the sounds where the deepest cultural feeling lies. Part 1. To get to the village of Kenedougou from Sikasso, you turn northeast at a large statue of a bala player in the center of a traffic circle. Although it is not a likeness of Neba Solo, rather a monument to all bala players, if you ask a taxi driver to go to the Neba Solo roundabout, this is where you will be placed. When people think of the bala in the Kenedougou region of Mali, the first person who comes to mind is Neba Solo. A few hundred yards past the statue, you take a left, entering a road that, after a few feet, turns to dirt. It is a reasonably flat, graded road at the beginning, but after the rice fields are crossed and a small village traversed, the road develops unyielding bumps, obstacles, and trenches in the dry season, muddy holes and water hazards in the rainy season. The road transforms itself in response to the human, animal, and vehicular traffic traversing it. When a hole or bump appears in one part of the road, traffic veers around it, gradually expanding its width. Frequent travelers know just when to drive on the left-hand or the right-hand side of the road. Horn honks warn pedestrians herding cattle, bicyclists carrying bales of tree leaves, and motorcyclists wearing dust masks that another vehicle is near. In the dry season, eventual success in navigating the road is assured, even if progress is slow. During the rainy season, the ravines turn to mud, creating a slip-sliding driving experience requiring techniques unlike those I learned to use on the snowy roads of Minnesota. Motorcyclists in particular develop skills for rough terrain resembling those of motocross contestants, carefully engaging and disengaging the gears as they make their way through threatening obstacles, something especially hazardous in the mud. After passing a security post at the entrance to Dendereso, a large town 34 kilometers from Sikasso, the visitor arrives in an open square and sees at its far end some buildings owned by Neba Solo. In 2005, the walls advertised a telephone business run by Neba Solo's sister, Wassa Traore. For a small fee, patrons of the cabine téléphonique Neba Solo could place or receive calls. If they were thirsty, Wassa also had a cooler of cold beverages for sale, mostly Fanta, Coca-Cola, and sparkling apple juice. To get to Kenedougou requires an additional 7 miles of travel through hilly terrain and a deteriorating road. In the rainy season, from June to October, the fields are lush with agricultural fertility. In the dry season, especially March and April, they are hard and dry. And then you get to Kenedougou. Suleiman Traore, the future Neba Solo, was born here in June of 1969 to Zanon and Kumantu Traore, one of 11 children in the Traore family. 3 of his brothers, Ousmane, Yakuba, and Karim, were sent to school in the neighboring village of Banbougou. But Neba Solo remained in Kenedougou learning to farm and herd cattle. He would leave the village with his older brother Ousmane at Misobatile around 9 a.m., following the cattle into uncultivated areas as they searched for food. On these long treks through the countryside with 40 to 50 cattle, Suleiman began to learn Bamanankan as they encountered people who did not speak Senufo. Sometimes they tilled fields with holes called daba or tugu as they waited for cattle to eat. They always returned to Kenedougou in the evening because Zanon Traore insisted that his sons return to the village every evening, as if to reinforce the message that they were not nomadic Fula, but first and foremost Senufo farmers. Like most villages in the Kenedougou region, agriculture is both the foundation of the economy and the symbolic centerpiece of Senufo cultural life. Nowhere is this more evident than in Neba Solo's composition Chimporoko no Moguru, a song celebrating the Senufo hero cultivator. For there's nothing more respected than in Senufo culture than being a skilled and strong farmer, because the survival of the community has historically been dependent on the production of food. Despite the recent availability of tractors, the vast majority of agricultural labor in Mali is still done by hand with large back-breaking hoes. Since cultivating by hand requires intense physical strength and endurance, it is viewed as the task of young men whose efforts are greatly admired and celebrated. To speed the work along, the young cultivators participate in hoeing contests to identify the champion cultivator, who will be awarded the champion cultivator staff, or in more recent times, Mali's flag. The staff or flag is placed at the end of the field, and several men begin hoeing, often accompanied by music, balafons, shakers, song, and drums. In fact, there is a whole genre of bala rhythms and songs for cultivators called famunia, featuring the quick triple field that can be heard at the opening of the piece you'll hear in a moment. The Senufo lyrics of the song are deceptively simple, divided into 4 key themes, the first advising people not to tell the secrets of the family, the second encouraging people to ignore the idle gossip of jealous enemies, lines 2 to 3, the third counseling families to live within their means, lines 4 to 7, and the fourth celebrating the hero cultivator. The lyrics are highly condensed, expressing in a few words some deeply held Senufo cultural values. In explaining the song to me, Neba Solo described the organization and psychology of Senufo hoeing contests. Imagine 4 or 5 cultivators, each taking 1 row of a field. Each one tries to become the leader by overtaking the others. The person who finishes first will have the honor of carrying the cultivator's staff and gain the approbation of the entire community. The term for champion cultivator in Senufo is Fange Ngani, which means the one who augments the fatigue of the lazy. That's great. The proverb condenses into a single term a Senufo shared understanding of the importance of the hero cultivator. Once he is ahead, the hero cultivator, rather than continuing to increase his lead, will slow down a little in order to encourage the others to do more work than they think they can. By remaining close to the stragglers, the champion cultivator challenges them to push harder, and they consequently fatigue themselves trying to keep up. He might earn some unkind comments from the stragglers behind his back, for his strength is literally creating more work for them. If the others fall behind, the fastest cultivator has the right to leave a part of his work for the others. So it is in the interest of the slower hoers to keep up. The hero cultivator conserves his strength while forging ahead, but has augmented the fatigue of the lazy. A deeper interpretation of this term praises the champion cultivator for inspiring the lazy to become courageous. Thanks to him, people will eat. Thanks to him, everyone will do their best. Memories of youthful hoeing contests invoke nostalgia, as I discovered one blistering hot day in Togotanjaso, a small village near Sikasso, as the band sat drinking tea and chatting while they awaited the evening concert. One of the band members found some hoes, Dabau or Tugu, leaning against a shed. All of a sudden, a mock hoeing contest was underway as Neba Solo, Lamisa Traore, and Umar Koulibaly dashed into the field and grouped themselves in adjacent rows. The dust flew as the parched soil of early May responded to the blows of the hoes. I'd now like to show you a condensed video performance of Chingparoko no Moguro, which in performance is usually about a 10-minute piece. And so you can get some idea of what it looks like in performance. I've put together 3 short clips from the beginning and middle and end of the performance. At the opening, you'll hear the rhythm of the cultivators, the famunia. The middle section shows Neba Solo delivering the penultimate, the most important line about what do you call the champion cultivator? I'm the champion cultivator who can pass everyone else in the field. If you try to pass him, you just might die of fatigue. The final segment shows you an up-tempo dance coda featuring the amazing dancing of his 2 dancers, Bokari and Ibrahim Dembele. Here you get some idea of the athleticism and precision associated with the champion cultivator. They're really incredible. So those of you who are familiar with West African cultural forms will know that the Senufo are hardly the only ethnic group to have agricultural contests and performance forms connected to agriculture. The Bamana, their close neighbors, have historically had Chiwara societies, which also sponsor agricultural contests. The Bamana, like the Senufo, have elaborate rites, rituals, and performances dedicated to assuring the fertility and spiritual integrity of the soil. Indeed, one of the major cultural themes in my book on Neba Solo will be the history of the overlap and mutual influence among the Senufo, Bamana, Muslim, Fula, and Jula cultural practices and histories. Foremost in my mind these days is the history of the war in Kenedougou and adjacent regions 120 years ago, when Samori Touré's Islamic Wassoulou Empire and Cheba Traore's Kenedougou Empire were at war across the southern region of Mali. Caught in between were tens of thousands of Senufo and Bamana farmers, many of whom were taken captive and turned into soldiers for one side or the other, creating in the aftermath much cultural fluidity and change. Tradition, it should be remembered, has never been something timeless and stable, but rather always responsive to historical contingencies such as these. So I'm moving on to part 2. I've established the importance of agriculture. Now we're going to look at the way the lyrics bring together music and the cultural themes in Mali. So I'm going to look at his song called Tata. And this, for example, refers to this history of Samori Touré and the Kenedougou kingdom. The Tata is a wall that was built by the Kenedougou Empire to protect Sikasso against the military attacks of Samori Touré and later the French. In his song called Tata, Neba Solo asked people to reflect on the wall and how they are treating it in the present day. He criticizes those who take its stones and mud to build houses of their own with no respect for the history the wall represents. People of Sikasso reflect. The Tata wall is crying. No one takes care of it. You, who are its caretakers, you take its mud and dig out its stones. So the easiest way to see the way in which music intersects with social and cultural issues in Neba Solo's music is through his words. Note that here the music is not simply something that reflects social issues, but rather calls people to take action in their behavior towards the Tata. The exhorting quality of the lyrics is something that pervades musics in this part of the world, not only in Senufo song, but the broader multi-ethnic Mande tradition at large. Singers ask people to do the right thing, to live up to the deeds of their ancestors, in this case to treat the Tata with respect for the brave defense of Sikasso they mounted in the military assaults by Samori and the French. If our ancestors could do this, he seems to say, the least you can do is not take mud and bricks for the wall for your own purposes. In a similar vein, Neba Solo's song Janfa criticizes betrayal and corruption. The lyrics exhort people to be tolerant of one another. Neba Solo talks about wearing traditional cloth with pride and then indirectly criticizes police and customs agents for being corrupt. Let's not betray each other. The subtext is don't demand tribute from people when they go through the control posts along the road. Just because you have knowledge of culture, tradition, and ethics doesn't mean that you won't forget it. Meant originally as something of a moral message directed against certain self-serving government officials, the song, post-coup, now takes on a larger sense of betrayal by the government. I've got another example. This one is more about gender relations. It's called Je vais te marier, I'm going to marry you. It mocks the kind of guy, common in urban Mali and New York and Boston, who pretends he's got money, is a businessman and a big shot in order to seduce young women. I'll play two passages from the piece. In the first, Neba Solo observes, the young man looks nice, but he's a bluffer, mentioning that he's using some of the well-known strategies of the poor in more than just Mali. The pants and shoes are borrowed. He's a bluffer. He's carrying a cell phone, but he doesn't have enough money to buy credit for it. He's a bluffer. So here's the first part.
Kameleni cheka nyinga bula fubara. Kameleni cheka nyinga bula fukabo. Pandalo singaleno kabula fubara. Sule singaleno kabula fubara. Cellular creditanga bula fubara.
In the second passage, he warns young women about guys like these, this time in French. Beware of these men who will betray you. They'll say they've just arrived from France or the US. They say they'll wire some money. In the end, all it is deception. Okay.
Allô, allô, allô les femmes. Allô, allô, allô les femmes. Surtout à vous les jeunes filles. Faites attention à ces hommes qui viennent vous tromper en disant qu'ils ont d'argent, qu'ils sont des hommes d'affaires. Je viens d'arriver, j'étais en Amérique, en France, j'ai fait transfert d'argent. Fais-moi confiance, fais-moi confiance, fais-moi confiance. Je vais te marier. Oh, finalement, c'est la déception. 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 Gonna go fair. I don't gotta be fair. I don't gonna get a fair.
Okay. I'd hate to give you the impression that all he does is talk about social issues too, so I'm going to turn my attention to a piece called Janyeko, which means your passion, that which you love. Neba Solo opens the song by telling people that your passion or what you love is always stronger than you are. The text goes on to encourage people to follow their passion and introduces each band member for having the passion to play their particular instrument. The passage I want to listen to today, however, comes at the end of the song when he says that even if people talk behind your back, it is only God that can hinder your passion, your hopes and dreams. Words can't kill you. I selected this passage because it is from what might be called, if we were talking about jazz, the shout chorus section. If we were talking about popular music, the hook, with very exciting music. I'd like you to listen here to the power of the music, the up-tempo dance and improvisation section for which Neba Solo and his group are so renowned. The intensity of the music augments the passion of the text, which speaks to Neba Solo's first having been criticized for the changes he made to traditional Senufo balafon music. Which brings me to part 3, the music fanatic section. You may have noticed the interlocking balaphon parts at the end of our last excerpt. The development of this style of bala playing has been Neba Solo's signature contribution to the balaphon style and aesthetics in the Kenedougou region. While it may sound like traditional music to you, what it represents is a thorough modernization, a jazzing up, if you will, of traditional Senufo balaphon style. Captivated by the bass lines of Alpha Blondy's reggae recording of Jerusalem, the 18-year-old Neba Solo had an epiphany as he walked through the streets of Bamako. What if he were to build a bigger bala with more bass notes and develop a new style featuring more prominent bass lines? What if he were to change the traditional tuning of the pentatonic bala so that it would be compatible with the tunings of other Malian instruments, such as the 6-string kamilingoni? By Senufo tradition, undertaking this experiment required asking for his father's permission. So Zanon Traore granted Suleiman a period of time in which to develop his ideas that would culminate in a recorded example of the new style. Suleiman added 3 bass notes to the bala's traditional 17 keys and also experimented with various tunings. National observers credit him with revolutionizing the place of the bala in Mali. Younger bala players in Kenedougou all emulate him. Now, please know, he makes all these balaphons himself. He considers himself to be both an artisan as an artist. The new style reconfigured the musical ensemble. Instead of 3 balas, 1 for bass, 1 for treble, and 1 for accompaniment, Solo used 2 balas. The accompaniment parts are distributed between the 2 instruments as follow. His brother Shaka on the treble bala generally improvises melodies with his right hand while accompanying with the left. For Neba Solo, he improvises more with the left and plays the accompaniment parts with the right, although he does much more than that. The interplay between the 2 brothers creates a rich contrapuntal texture among interlocking parts. What is remarkable in performance is their many ways of modulating from one configuration of parts to another, often with changes in tempo. The new contemporary sound for the bala modernized an instrument that had been dismissed by urban dwellers as a primarily village instrument that was not suitable for professional music. Indeed, to understand the respect in which Neba Solo is now held, one needs to know that when he first came to Sikasso, many teased him as playing the ribs of a donkey. Neba Solo has become a figure of particular pride, then, for the people of Kenedougou, especially those in the dozens of small villages surrounding the city. So I want to illustrate how this works a bit in his piece called Chekise. And Chekise is a love song and a dance. The lyrics speak of a woman who excuses herself to take a walk after dinner. What she really hopes for is to hear the sound of her beloved's voice as he waits for her. As in all Neba Solo songs, there are other messages too. In this case, coupled to this nice love song, is the idea that people need to work if they want to be part of the community. They can't just lay about and drink tea all day. The musical texture accompanying the song is what I'm calling Senufo counterpoint. I use the Western term with all its possible misinterpretation to draw attention to the importance of the combination of parts in this music and the oral awareness of the bala players of the independent melodic parts of each of their hands as well as in combination. So I'm going to show you some of the parts that go into this piece. So here is Neba Solo demonstrating the treble bala part to this piece. Now the bass is considered the mother of the bala. There is a proverb indeed that says, whatever you hear in the child's mouth, it is the mother who said it, drawing attention to the importance of the bass. So now listen to it. You might think, oh yeah, this sounds really cool and familiar. I'd like you to hear the next example of him playing this and listen to where he taps his foot. It's the beat where the dancers dance, and it might be in a place that isn't quite what you expect. Okay, so now we've seen that there are two patterns that form a kind of core that interlock with one another, but we're not done yet. They don't just repeat the same pattern all the time, they vary the patterns. So here's an example of him varying this simple pattern. Okay. But we're not done with that either, because it's not simply about varying the patterns, it's about moving from one to another. So often as he's playing one, and you'll hear this as you listen to the musical texture, it'll move from one pattern to another. And so listen to this one. So try to remember that last phrase of the pattern, because we're going to hear it in a minute in a longer performance of the full band doing this piece, where it becomes the accompaniment to his brother's improvised solo. So try to remember that one. Now, I know I have a number of composers here and true music fanatics, so of course I had to put the notation down, okay? So I'm just showing you the alignment of these parts. The arrows down are where the beat where the dancers are. And this shows you the relationship of the bass part to it. You notice they're not quite, they're in complete dialogue with one another. And so now I'd like to play you a little bit of what it sounds like in performance and see if you can see the outline of each of those patterns in the performance. Okay, so a little bit in performance. Now we're going to see some video footage. What we'll see is the end of him completing the lyric to this song, then going on and transferring to Shaka, taking an extended balafon solo. And notice how he moves from idea to idea, then sort of pauses and heats things up by changing into another accompaniment pattern. And then you'll see a moment when he pauses for a minute. And then he takes up a very intense interactive part with his brother, Neba Solo. And as Neba Solo comes in, he'll play that rhythm we just heard as an accompaniment part to this solo. So you see there, and this is one section of a larger performance where the dancers sort of are dancing, and that becomes and they're improvising in the background and switching between parts behind one another. So now I've made a more condensed version of the end part of this. We've seen just the medium tempo section of this piece. I'm going to show you the more up-tempo dance section of this piece. And please listen for the improvisation taking place between the two balafons as the dancers perform. Sometimes shaka accompanies and solos, and sometimes the other way around. And I've included video footage of each dancer improvising a solo dance as well. One thing that distinguishes these dancers is they do both synchronized dancing and improvised solo work.
Yan somebody.
As you can see, the music of Neba Solo is a musician's dream on multiple levels. A rich music of virtuosically interlocking parts, poignant lyrics, dance virtuosity, and interactions with audiences that serve to create a feeling of community, comfort, moral aspiration, and fun. My book explores the cultural life of Kenedougou against the backdrop of history and contemporary historical events, with a commitment to portraying the brilliance of art and performance in condensing and sustaining cultural meaning, especially in difficult times such as now. When I began this project, I imagined a case study of Neba Solo and his band, which contextualized the music's social and cultural messages and the intricacies of its musical sound. Typical ethnomusicology. I imagined a stable Mali in which modernizing and democratizing components of Mali's history increasingly placed this music and its musicians in dialogues with regional and international musical flows. Constrained by the huge economic differential between Mali and the United States, but increasingly mediated by the internet. I imagine talking about the pan-Savannah cultural system of which Kenedougou is a part, and a rich cultural mixture that would be continuously evolving, with Bamako becoming an ever-internationalizing center for recording and collaborations between Malians and outsiders. I never imagined that the state itself would collapse, and that war would be facing Mali again. That the history of Samaré Touré and Babemba Traoré could become a seemingly immediate context for the fear and uncertainty facing Mali right now. I didn't think that Neba Solo's next song would need to caution people not to kill children in war. I'd like to close with some of the lyrics to his most recent piece, Jeng Kafo, which he will sing during the concert. He sings in 4 languages, Senufo, Bamanankan, French, and English, hoping to reach not only those at home, but all of us. I've clipped it to emphasize the Bamanankan. You'll note that it has an eerie, ominous sound, a bit different from the exuberance of most of his work, while at the same time being simple, almost childlike. In some ways, it's very unsettling. So I'll stop there, and I've tried to present both give you an introduction to his music, which shows its rootedness in the agricultural tradition, the way in which social messages link up broader swaths of Malian society through the kinds of messages they put in their song, and the richness of this tremendous musical language, which I hope you've enjoyed. Thank you. We're open for questions. Yes. Skip. Here, go into this one.
Can you all hear me?
No.
Then it's not important. How does race and racism playing themselves out in the dispute between North and South because of the genetic diversity between the Tuareg and the darker people in the South?
Could you repeat the question?
Yeah.
Il voudrait savoir
In English.
qu'est-ce que c'est les faits de racisme en Mali aujourd'hui entre le conflit entre les Tuaregs et les autres dans Mali. He doesn't speak.
Could you repeat it for them in the back?
Yes.
In
Ok,
English?
je pense que ce n'est pas une question de racisme. C'est une question de comment on appelle, incompréhension. Sinon, si c'était le racisme, il n'y a pas à voir les Touaregs parmi les dirigeants du pays. Mais il y a des Touaregs parmi les dirigeants du pays. Donc, pour moi, ce n'est pas une question de racisme. C'est une question d'être violé le pays. C'est tout.
So for him, it's not a question of racism, but that the Tuareg haven't been in the leadership of the country, and that if you talk to other people, people will say that there is a complexion difference between the Tuareg and the people in the South, and that if you look historically at the Mali Federation, part of the reason for independence is people did not want to be ruled by darker-skinned people from the South. But many people dispute this. Many people say that it's the white West that is imposing that interpretation on it. So this is a topic of considerable debate.
My
Dearly
question
beloved.
is, I really like the way you trace the influence of one individual on the arts of Mali. And so I find that when people discuss African aesthetic forms, they talk more about culture, groups, rather than individuals. Now, is this something new, do you think, that individuals have transformed aesthetics within Africa, or has this been going on for a long time and scholars have failed to recognize the influence of the individual?
Well, one huge critique of the literature on African music is that it reduced people to groups, to anonymous cultural groupings, that some kind of genius of the community was simply generating the music, and failing to recognize that individual innovations are in fact something that are recognized and admired and celebrated. So part of my reason of wanting to focus on Neba Solo as an individual is he really has had that effect in his own work. It's just how we might talk about Charlie Parker or Miles Davis having an enormous influence on the community of musicians around them. He is that kind of leader in what he does. So he both comes from a tradition, but he's challenged the borders of the tradition. But in fact, traditions are flexible and dynamic things, and they're always the dialogue between the individual and the community. It's never never simply been the collective. It is a collection of individuals interacting and coming to a thing. So he's been this dynamic force. Another reason to focus on him is a great deal has been done on Mande musicians in Mali, very little on the Senufo and this part of the cultural world in Mali that connects with Burkina Faso and Côte d'Ivoire. And also, I'm driven by music. I just love this music. I think it's such a beautiful and warm sound. Tout c'est bon.
Oui.
I believe you mentioned that in addition to being a musician, he's also a craftsman of the instruments.
Yes.
I wondered, on the one hand, how that's evolved over time, and secondly, when the instrument is made, will he keep them all, sell them, trade? What happens to the instruments after they're completed?
Je voudrais savoir comment on fait le balafon. Qu'est-ce que tu fais avec le balafon? Est-ce que tu vends les balafons?
Ok. Les balafons, j'ai un centre spécial pour les balafons, fabriquer, apprendre à jouer, apprendre à fabriquer. Et je vends les balafons aussi. Donc j'ai un centre spécial pour ça. Pour faire les balafons, je pense qu'il faut prendre un peu le temps pour fabriquer les balafons. De 15 jours jusqu'à 2 mois, ça dépend de la qualité de bois qu'on doit fabriquer les balafons. Parce que c'est un arbre qui s'appelle Guéné. C'est un arbre qui est déjà fini avec la vie, d'être vivre, qui est déjà mort. De 1 an jusqu'à 10 ans, donc on le coupe, on l'amène à la maison et taillé. Après on le met dans un four pour le chauffer, pour que ça soit bien sec. Et après, maintenant la fabrication, les accords, tout ça, ça vient après. Voilà, les balafons.
He feels he has a special feeling for the balafon. He sometimes describes it as his first wife. But part of him learning to play is learning to make and take care of the balafon. And they use wood. They cut it. The Senufo are proud of being conservative with conservation about the trees, of only using ones that have already died. He brings the wood in and the calabashes. The wood goes into the oven. This is the role of the blacksmith in helping to create the balafon. And this man is always like, always making the balafon, and it's fascinating to watch him. He tunes the calabashes to the actual keys of the instrument, and is an extremely careful craftsman. People from all over Mali commission him to make balafons, not only pentatonic ones from his tradition, but increasingly heptatonic ones, 7-note balafons for the Mande jellies. And he considers himself an artisan as well as an artist. And yes, he sells balafons.
Ingrid, thank you very much for a wonderful talk, and thank you for the music. You mentioned toward the end of your talk the role of the internet, and certainly there are a number of YouTube videos that are available. So I'm curious to ask you if you could talk a little bit about this musical innovation from Mali in terms of its influence and impact in the rest of the world, on other musicians in other parts. And as you know, I'm interested in questions about the reverse direction of globalization or cultural globalization, the way it's usually understood. So I'm interested in hearing hear about how this, cultural practice and musical style emerging from Mali then travels.
Well, music in Mali has had an enormous force on the international stage. The most internationally known artists are Salif Keita and Oumou Sangaré, Ali Farka Touré. They increasingly, those records have had a broad popularity and led to tours of musicians in France and the United States. Neba Solo has toured in France. He's been here in the United States. He's performed in China. He's performed in South Korea. These are all places that his music has been heard. And you're right, that people are trying to use the internet to their advantage. It's difficult there because the internet connection is slower. But people have wanted to get their videos on YouTube. When he was here in 2005, he bought a computer and he learned how to use it, and he taught himself GarageBand. He has been remixing some of his stuff. So the fact that people play with acoustic instruments should not lead you to think that they aren't trying to figure out ways to have technology work for them. And Bamako became a tremendous international center for recording. A number of jazz musicians in particular recorded with Malian artists in Bamako, people like Didi Bridgewater, Roswell Rudd, Bela Fleck, and others. And, I thought that'd be expanding, but now people are afraid to go to Bamako right now. So.
Thank you so much for all of this. It's really fascinating. And I'm particularly interested in what you said about, I'll try to say this in French when I'm done, but
Okay.
I'm particularly interested in what you said about the lyrics being not just reflecting social issues, but a call for action.
Yes.
And I guess maybe I should ask Mr. Solo about this particular last song we looked at. Do you think that this will have an impact and that the call will be heard and people will listen to what you're saying? Is there room for music to impact what happens in the public sphere in Mali? So,
Okay.
pour Monsieur Solo, la question c'est dans cette chanson ici, on entend un appel pour la change. Et est-ce que c'est possible que les gens au Mali vont vous écouter? Est-ce que c'est possible que la musique peut changer quelque chose?
Bien sûr. D'accord. D'abord, je commence par... j'avais chanté une chanson sur les vaccinations des enfants. En ce moment, c'était vraiment une difficulté pour que les parents des enfants acceptent des vaccinations. Mais après, quand j'ai vu ces problèmes, je suis rencontré des médecins qui m'ont expliqué quelle est l'importance des vaccinations. Et l'enfant qui n'est pas vacciné a telle maladie qu'elle peut rencontrer. D'après savoir comprendre tout ça, j'ai composé une chanson et expliquer les gens, vacciner nos enfants, parce que les enfants sont de l'avenir du pays et du tout. Après ces chansons, ça a beaucoup changé les choses. Beaucoup de gens même m'ont rencontré, m'ont appelé pour dire vraiment, grâce à vous, on a compris l'importance des vaccinations. Donc voilà pourquoi les balafons restent toujours une messagerie. Parce que avant, les moments qu'il n'y avait pas de radio, il n'y a pas de télé. Et le message important, on joue les balafons. Quand le public vient, on arrête les balafons, fait lancer le message. Donc jusqu'à nos jours, moi je souhaite continuer avec les messages. Tout ce qui pose le problème, je cherche la solution, expliquer les gens pour que les gens puissent comprendre. Voilà, tout simplement pour dire que la musique peut changer les choses. Parce que la musique fait partie dans nos vies, ça nourrit comme nous, on a besoin de nourrir. Voilà.
So he said that, yes, music does have a call to action, and he talked about his piece called Vaccination, which he wrote specifically to encourage people to get their children vaccinated, even if they were suspicious about this Western medicine, the vaccination, and that the song had an impact on people taking their children to be vaccinated. He said that the balafon has always been a messenger, has been about sending messages of various kinds. So he hopes today that this message about reuniting us, Jeng Kafo, for Mali is something that can have an effect too. He also said that music nourishes us, it feeds us, and is something very important.
Bonsoir, je vais essayer en français puis en anglais et je voudrais vous remercier d'être venu et pour la musique.
Merci.
Et surtout cette chanson qui m'a fait penser à une chanson de Youssou N'Dour qui s'appelle Satal et qui était après les problèmes entre les Mauritaniens et les Sénégalais et qui, comme celui-là, invite les gens à s'entendre et je crois que c'est très très important ce que vous faites. Ma question c'est que c'est très simple, c'est simplement comment est-ce que vous travaillez avec les autres musiciens pour les répétitions? Parce que l'ensemble c'est vraiment étonnant et je voudrais savoir entre les musiciens et aussi entre les musiciens et les danseurs, comment est-ce que vous travaillez? So my question is about practicing and how the amazing ensemble that we saw is achieved.
How the group works together.
Ok, merci. Nous sommes des programmes très précis avec des musiciens. Tout le temps, on est ensemble pour animer, concerts, animation des villages. Donc, avec tout ça, s'il y a une partie libre, on organise les répétitions. Il y a un lieu spécial pour les répétitions avec les musiciens. On fait les répétitions. Chaque morceau, on organise la chorégraphie parce que chaque morceau, il y a des pas chorégraphiés uniquement pour ces morceaux. Donc chaque morceau, dès que j'ai fini la composition des morceaux, j'organise les répétitions avec les musiciens. Après, avec les musiciens directement, je rencontre aussi le danseur, on organise la chorégraphie. Et voilà, c'est comme ça qu'on travaille.
So he said that they rehearse a lot. He has a specific place in Sikasso. He calls it his atelier for rehearsing the band. And they rehearse things very, very precisely. One of the things he's known for are these very precise arrangements that you hear in some of these pieces that have precise cues for changing the tempos and the steps of the dance. And he wants you to know that each of the songs has a choreography of steps that are specific to the piece, that have a kind of narrative idea with them, that he says he's not a dancer himself, but he has suggested kinds of gestures and things that the dancers employ in their steps, and has a sense of what's appropriate for one text or another.
I can ask a follow-up to exactly that.
Yes.
Which is just, so are the dancers working in real time
elle a une question que comment est-ce que les danseurs travaillent avec le groupe dans les répétitions? Est-ce que les danseurs sont tout le temps présents?
Les danseurs, ils sont tout le temps avec le groupe. Parce que nous avons un groupe qui a été créé depuis en 87. Après 87-91, j'ai fait venir les danseurs. Après ça, maintenant, chaque nouveau morceau, le danseur a des copies de ces morceaux. Et même s'il n'y a pas de musiciens, ils se rencontrent, organisés, et répéter sur ces morceaux. Après, on se regroupe, voir ce qu'ils sont faits, est-ce que c'est bien ou bien c'est pas bien. Là maintenant, j'ai essayé de corriger certaines choses. Je ne sais pas danser moi, je ne sais pas danser, mais je sais corriger quand même. Voilà, donc voilà, c'est comme ça le danseur travaille. Chaque morceau, il prend une copie, écouter, travailler ailleurs. Parce qu'il y a des moments, les musiciens peuvent se rencontrer pour répéter, mais le moment n'est pas disponible pour les danseurs. Et il y a des moments aussi qui est possible pour les danseurs, mais il n'est pas possible pour les musiciens. Souvent, on s'y rencontre, tous les musiciens et des danseurs, suivant les musiciens seulement, suivant les danseurs seulement. C'est comme ça.
So he said that the dancers are always with the group, but there are many times when they're preparing a piece, which he'll record his rehearsals, and he'll make the recording of the music available to the dancers, and they practice by themselves and work out some steps, and then they come back to the group, and they'll do it with the band, and Neba Solo will see whether he likes it or not, and he says he'll often make some corrections in their dance steps. He says he doesn't know how to dance himself, but he knows how to correct dance. Okay, so, and that's how they work together. Okay. Yes.
Merci beaucoup.
Merci à vous. Merci à vous.
The rest will be entirely in anglais.
Okay.
What is the territorial range of the balafon by country and or by people, and what is the range of this new influence throughout the continent in that?
C'est une question de combien de peuples utilisaient les balafons. Quel est combien de pays est-ce qu'il y a des balafons là-bas? I can answer a little bit in English. This area where he is, it crosses the borders with Mali, Cote d'Ivoire, and Burkina Faso. There's a huge, and that international boundary there makes no sense. It's a big cultural area with the balafon. And these kinds of xylophones they're found throughout the continent. Uganda is one place where there has been a lot of balafons. There are many others as well.
La Guinée aussi.
In Guinea, quel d'autres pays?
La Guinée, au Rwanda, c'est beaucoup de pays utilisent les balafons. Je n'ai pas le nom de ces pays à ma tête tout de suite, mais je pense qu'il y a beaucoup de pays parce que au festival Le Triangle du Balafon, nous on invite la Côte d'Ivoire, le Burkina, la Guinée, Tanzanie, beaucoup de pays, il y en a des balafons. Seulement la façon d'utilisation est différente par rapport à la langue.
So he mentioned several countries, Guinea, Rwanda, Tanzania, among the others. He mentioned the Festival Triangle de Balafon, which is a balafon contest that they started. Of course, the first year he won. And they asked him not to compete again.
So, and where is that? And also this
It's-
modern. I'm
It's
sorry.
held in Sikasso.
In this modern style, how far reaching is this modern
Quel
style?
est l'extent de ton influence sur la façon de jouer le balafon. Moi, j'ai vu que tout le monde copie toi.
Oui, c'est la façon de travail. Parce que en 87, je me suis dit, il faut que je fasse quelque chose pour que les gens parlent. Les gens disent à mon nom les jours à venir. Parce que j'ai écouté un morceau d'un artiste qui vient de la Côte d'Ivoire qui s'appelle Alpha Blondy. Le titre du morceau c'est Jérusalem. Quand j'ai écouté ce morceau, tout de suite, je me suis dit, il faut que je fasse quelque chose pour que les gens parlent aussi de mon nom. Tout de suite, j'ai essayé de créer mon propre création, la façon de fabrication, la façon de jouer, la façon en tout cas, de créer quelque chose de nouveau. Quand j'ai fait ces créations, les gens commencent à dire, ah, Solo qui viennent, Solo c'est l'imité de Suleiman. Les gens commencent à dire, Solo qui vient de Neba, il vient d'évoluer les balafons, il vient de créer les choses. Donc Solo vient de Neba. Neba Dougou c'est mon village, c'est le nom de mon village natal, là où je suis né. Donc Solo vient de Neba, voilà enfin Neba Solo. Donc à partir de cela, à partir de ce moment, tous les balafonistes qui veulent vraiment avancer, ils viennent me voir. Vraiment, on a besoin de balafons comme toi, donc il faut nous fabriquer des balafons la même chose comme toi. Donc tout de suite, les gens commencent à faire comme moi. Donc actuellement, c'est rare de voir les balafons qui n'aient pas essayé de faire comme moi. Donc vraiment, je remercie le Dieu. Ce que je cherchais, finalement, je l'ai eu.
So he talked about in 1987 forming his own group, and he very much wanted to find a voice so that people would remember his name. This isn't so much different than the path of any artist we know of, wanting to find their own voice. And he did it partly through making this new kind of balafon, making a new kind of configuration of the parts that had people starting to talk about him. He talked about the origin of his name, Neba Solo. His given name is Suleiman Traore, and a common nickname for that is Solo. They call him Solo. And so everyone started saying, have you heard that Solo who comes from Neba? He's really something special. So that's kind of how he got his moniker. And the real spread of his style, he says, was partly facilitated by the fact that when they heard Neba Solo's fabulous balafons with this new, different tuning, they all wanted balafons like it. So they came and they ordered balafons like he has. And so pretty much now everybody's got one sort of in his style in this particular region, in that tri-country area. So it's been my experience, whenever I've seen young balafonists play, they're trying to do it, they're trying to have the synchronized dancing, but very few people have the compositions he has.
One follow-up, if I may. In modern music here in the States, there's been a tradition of whereby visual artists, painters, and sculptors are impacted by the music. Is there any evidence that he can cite that there's an impact on visual artistry as a result of this new sound?
C'est une question de l'influence de ton musique à les arts visuels. Est-ce qu'il y a un impact de ton musique à les artistes visuels à Mali?
Je n'ai pas bien compris. Je n'ai pas bien compris la question.
Doesn't quite understand the question, and I haven't seen any. He's never talked about visual artists being impacted.
Gravitate around, are they in this orbit of this?
There are not that many visual artists, partly many of the traditional masking things are not done because of Islam.
Can you tell us something about the transmission of musical expertise? Is it basically family-centered? Is it gendered? Should we assume that it's purely oral? And if it's purely oral, how does that affect the recognition of improvisation, et cetera? You mentioned the importance of your father's permission to experiment. Can you tell us more about that dynamic? Thank you.
Elle voudrait savoir comment est-ce qu'on apprend le balafon. Est-ce que c'est dans la famille? Est-ce que c'est dans les classes? Est-ce que c'est seulement par oreille ou des autres façons?
Ok. Pour apprendre le balafon, il faut d'abord des oreilles. Parce que le balafon même, on l'accorde par les oreilles. Donc il faut des oreilles. Je ne dis pas on ne prend pas le balafon dans la classe. Mais chez moi, je n'écris pas le balafon. Avec l'explication, on apprend le balafon. C'est vrai, il y a de certains niveaux. Il y a de certains niveaux, jusqu'à 4 niveaux. Mais ce n'est pas avec l'écriture. Écoutant, voir l'expérience que la personne est, on apprend comme ça petit à petit, avec la façon d'explication des techniques. Donc, celui qui commence aujourd'hui, il n'est pas comme celui qui a déjà commencé 1 mois, 2 mois. Quelqu'un peut commencer aujourd'hui avec l'intelligence, il peut avoir les mêmes compréhensions comme celui qui a déjà fait 1 mois. C'est comme ça. Parce que moi, j'ai préféré d'apprendre les gens de balafon comme moi je l'ai pris. Parce que si on arrive à écrire le balafon, je me suis dit, est-ce que ça va rester comme je le connais déjà? Est-ce que ça va rester toujours le balafon? Est-ce que ça ne va pas transformer le balafon à autre chose? Donc, vaut mieux, comme je l'ai pris, d'apprendre les gens avec les mêmes idées.
Well, so he talked about you learn it by ear. You need to learn it by ear. I will testify that he's a fabulous teacher. He shows people the technique of it. He shows people how to listen to it. There are 4 different levels people go through, but he has a very organized pedagogy, and he has many apprentices and people who have studied with him. I'll tell you, I showed him the notation I made one time, and he looked at it and went, "It's done, it's in my head. It's best in the
J'ai oublié quelque chose. La question est que si c'est une question de famille, ce n'est pas une question de famille. Tout le monde est libre d'apprendre le balafon. Parce que dans mon centre à Sikasso, les gens viennent un peu partout. Aux États-Unis, en Europe, en Asie, en Afrique. Donc tout le monde est libre d'apprendre le balafon. Ce n'est pas une question de famille.
Right, it's not a hereditary instrument that anybody can learn it. Women can learn it. There are women who play at the Triangle Festival de Balafon in Sikasso. It's not gender specific either, although it's more usual for men to play it.
Ingrid, one of the marvelous things about your work is that you do explicate technique. Form is first and foremost, and context is secondary to your textual analysis. Where did the ridiculous idea that all African art was, all African music was collective and functional, to which you alluded in passing, where did that come from? I mean, the whole idea that it would, reduce the individuality of a genius to the collective and functional. You know, it's racist. Where did it come from? Do you have any idea?
It is. It is. There's racism there. There's the history of colonialism there, where everybody was talking about African ethnic groups as tribes with these inscrutable practices that made no sense to the Western mind. Now, anthropology in its early days had good intentions, wanting to go and document these things and show that these are not senseless sort of things, but did the same thing, sort of make everybody into an exemplar of the group. And, you know, if we'd applied that same thing to ourselves, I think we would have understood right away that this cannot possibly be, because even in the most determined culture that wants its children to be exactly how the parents are, just what kind of luck are you going to have with that? So that children rebel, children resist, and that the process of making is always one that is partly a contestation, partly communal, and that's why I think music is an ideal way that you can show this. You can see the embeddedness in tradition, and the, you know, many of the Sinuva songs are like jazz standards. They're like traditional songs that people know, but the way he does it and developed it are different. In that kind of celebration of the individuality, people, you know, people admire that. It's not just simply the imposition of Western individuality. It is, you know, a living, breathing thing, part, I think, of, you know, any cultural grouping.
Thank you.
Okay, I think we're done.